Within striking distance of the summit, a team of mountain climbers struggles not only against the severe environment, but also with their own emotions, fears, and desires. Will they find the motivation to push on, or will the challenge become overwhelming? How will they each cope with these extreme pressures? And what will become of this group effort should individual climbers respond differently?
I'm not really sure what took place. I don't know if anyone else had questioned the fact that maybe somebody wanted to go on, but Ralph said the reason he came into our tent is he heard me asking Carl that there has to be someone else that wants to go on.
I was surprised at how little experience some of the people had that were on the trip. I was impressed that they would have the guts to go to Mount Logan. It's a big mountain and it's pretty far north.
Just as changing circumstances prompt the interaction of personal and group relationships during a mountain climb, the challenges we face in life reveal the complex makeup of human behavior. Why do we behave the way we do? How can we gain a better understanding of our actions and the actions of other people? These questions are the inspiration for the study of psychology, which, stated simply, is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes.
People are just fascinated with people, and I think that we study human behavior to try and get a better understanding of who we are and why we are the way we are.
We study human behavior because we can't help it. We are humans. We are out there every day watching it, developing personal hypotheses about what is going on. It's in our very nature to understand it with the best tools we have to bring to bear on the problem.
Your life is a constant lab in psychology, and people study human behavior to understand the problems they and others have and to try to resolve them.
Ultimately, as we study behavior, we are trying to enlighten our understanding of our motivations, of our actions, and also to create better societies for us to live in.
Located in the remote Yukon Territory of Western Canada, Mount Logan stands at an elevation of 19,550 feet amid the largest ice field outside of the polar regions, making this isolated mountain particularly challenging to climbers intent on conquering its peak. By examining any human experience, even the adventure of 10 people as they attempt the exciting but also dangerous task of climbing Mount Logan, is an opportunity for psychologists to learn more about the complexities of human behavior. Psychologists conduct research and apply the scientific method to discover why people do what they do. Psychologists are interested in helping people understand themselves, others, and the society in which they live. Psychology is the science that helps people get the most out of their life.
I get joy from it, a feeling of accomplishment. I think what interests me about Logan is it's the third most glaciated area on the planet after Antarctica and Greenland, and it's just an incredibly gorgeous place. Just so much snow and ice. It's an ice field literally with peaks rising out of the ice, and just can't wait to experience that, the beauty that I think is going to be there.
My husband laughs at me because if I'm having a bad day at the office, I'll just go into his office and he'll know I'll be standing at the door and he'll just say, "You're going hiking or you're going climbing, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I have to get out of here." And all it takes is for me to get up in the mountains and I just go, "Oh, that's better. That's what I needed." So it is my therapy.
Yes.
A really good description I've heard of mountaineering is being safe in a dangerous place.
There you go, Mike.
Yeah.
Very good.
It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I wish we could choose to be this safe on the freeway. You know,
Yeah.
we choose the ropes we use. We place people where we want them. I think we're a lot safer up here when we're out on the freeway, to tell you the truth.
A lot of people are a little bit critical of the things I do for my recreation, but I look upon it as an affirmation of life. I think that if you're physically capable of doing these things, you should venture out into that territory and try it.
As the Mount Logan team establishes their base camp in preparation for the 14-day expedition, the climbers come to terms with how their own motivation can help them survive.
When you're very fatigued and trying to decide whether to continue, I think what it comes down to is just motivation. How badly do you want it? How hard are you willing to push yourself? When you're pushing yourself really hard, eventually you're going to pay the price.
During a climb, I don't have much problem digging deep and keeping the motivation when things get tough. I think that's part of the allure of climbing.
Obviously, we do not have to be in a life or death situation to be motivated. Psychologists are constantly conducting research in attempts to help us understand what drives us to make certain choices, what drives some people to persist, even when faced with life-threatening circumstances. The question of what really motivates human behavior is one of the most formidable questions faced by psychologists.
Motivation is one of the most theoretical of the areas in psychology because it allows you to build general theories of human behavior and infra-human behavior too. But also there's a lot of applied implications. So we usually think of motivation in terms of achievement. Why is Johnny not studying in school? That's a motivational question. Hopefully if we knew something about motivation, we could understand his dynamics and figure out a way to have him study.
For the Mount Logan team, perhaps the most obvious sign of motivation is their willingness to push on, to persist in the face of incredible odds. This same drive to forge ahead toward a goal can be seen in all aspects of daily life.
Persistence of behavior is another indicator of motivation. How long will you work at it? Say you're working at a task in an achievement setting, and it's very difficult. How long will you work at it until you solve it? So that's an indicator of motivation. Choice is another of the main indicators of motivation. What do you choose to do? You're at home studying, your girlfriend calls. She says, let's go out and have coffee. What do you do? And now what are you more motivated to do? Study or be with your girlfriend? So choice is an indicator of motivation, and probably the best and most important indicator.
Historically, motivation researchers were trying to develop that grand theory that captured the motivation of all behavior. Today, motivation researchers look at many different aspects of motivation. They look at biological aspects, social aspects of motivation, and they also study specific forms of motivation, the motivation to eat, curiosity and exploratory behavior as a form of motivation, achievement as a form of motivation.
Different psychologists will look at these climbers and be interested in different questions. Psychologists who study motivation may look at the motivation of these climbers. However, physiological psychologists may be interested in how our physiological systems might adapt to different circumstances. And psychologists interested in sensation and perception may be interested in how the temperature and altitude affect our perceptions of the environment.
The cold and the altitude and the physical exertion that it takes to maintain yourself at the high altitude is extreme in most cases. Most people would not want to put themselves through that, and this is perhaps what distinguishes a mountaineer different from a climber or a hiker, because a mountaineer is willing to expose himself to this type of atmospheric conditions, psychological conditions that he's going to have to endure in order to survive.
In the first week, it became clear that each member of the Mount Logan expedition team would need to find within him or herself a way to cope with the extreme conditions. Each member will need to find a way to personally deal with the challenges of the climb. Each climber's ability to cope with the cold, the altitude, fatigue, and their own emotions is being put to an extreme test.
There's so many things on the mountain that you have no control over. The weather, the elements, the altitude, all those things can make you absolutely miserable.
I think definitely the range of emotions in stressful situations like that is really strong. You swing back and forth between ecstasy of just being where you're at, it's a beautiful day, the scenery is wonderful, everything's great, to missing loved ones, wanting to be home, swearing that this is the last climbing trip you're ever going to go on. I think mainly it is just the not constant stress, but increased stress day in and day out.
That's an interesting question, because stress is a common term. We use it all the time in everyday life. We say someone's stressed out or I'm under a lot of stress, but it's really a very complex idea as well.
The ability to cope with stress can dramatically affect a climber's ability to function in the extreme environment of Mount Logan. However, stress is not only important in extreme environments. In our daily lives, at work, at home or school, our ability to recognize and effectively deal with stress can also make dramatic differences. Stress, if not handled properly, can negatively affect our emotions, our motivations, our relationships, our ability to learn, to solve problems, even our physical health.
Well, I think having multiple stressors, having things going poorly in various parts of your life is very common, and maybe particularly common in modern life because we have so many areas of family and work and health issues and recreation, relationships.
We accept that stress happens, acute stress, chronic stress, and the accumulation that happens. But it isn't necessarily so that that has to lead to the kind of intense and prolonged strain that can actually undermine your physical health and your performance. It's up to you to intervene in a way that stops that sinister process.
Stress is certainly not the only reason why we study psychology. Psychology touches every aspect of our lives. Developmental psychologists study human growth from infant and child development to old age. Cognitive psychologists study how we learn and use language, how memory functions, and the nature of intelligence. Clinical psychologists do psychotherapy, educational psychologists work within schools, experimental psychologists conduct research and industrial organizational work with job applicants and the work environment. If people are involved, you can be certain psychologists are also involved. As our expedition team was about to find out, psychologists also studied leadership and how gender stereotypes can affect the choices we make. As the lead climbers began to tire, Carl, the expedition leader, was reluctant to put Wanda, the only female, in a lead position.
I think that I probably should have been out front on the lower end of the mountain helping out. Mike and Gary were the only ones that were out on front breaking trail, and I didn't want to question Carl's decisions. He was the team leader, and he would assign the rope teams every day.
Male and female climbers are different in several aspects. You don't expect them to do the same things. You don't expect them to be in the same mental frame as others.
For whatever reason, I don't know, Carl has put me out in front before, but he never put me out on front on the lower end of the mountain, and I would have very willingly went there because I would have loved to have taken some of the toll off of the other individuals that seem to be breaking trail every day.
Gender roles refer to the things that we typically expect men or women to do, how they behave, what types of personality attributes we associate with each gender. Gender role stereotypes are what we expect that men and women should do. Our stereotype or prototype picture of a typical male or a typical woman.
Our expectations for males and females.
Expectations, how they should behave, what kind of people they are, what their personalities are like.
They're usually capable of doing a lot of things, but for instance, we know that physiologically they're not capable of carrying the same loads that a male counterpart would carry. So you compensate for that, and you allow that to take place. You don't expect them to do the same things.
Men, generally being stronger, may plow through something and use brute force, as opposed to a woman may think there might be an easier way to do this based on the fact that she's not strong as a bull. So she's going to find a better way. I'm not saying that maybe we stop and think about a situation a little bit longer, but we may give a different objective to the scenario that's laid out in front of us.
Our sense of identity as male or female is one of the greatest influences on how we define ourselves, how we behave, who we are throughout our whole life. And I think as we grow older and hopefully a little bit wiser, we start to question, why did I act this way when I was younger? Do I have to follow that rule of masculinity? Women are thinking about the same issues too. It's like, well, why can't I be in this profession? And why can't I speak louder? Why do I have to wear makeup? Why do I have to wear these sort of clothes? And to think about sort of the freedom that comes along with not having to live by these rules of masculinity or femininity can be really quite growth enhancing for both men and women.
The message is a complex message, but to make it very simple is that men and women are different in many ways. We're similar in many ways. We both have, we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, a mouth, and so forth. And we have a lot of similarities, but we have a lot of differences. And those differences are both biological and as a result of the way we're socialized. There are only 2 things you never forget when you meet someone: the color of their skin and their sex. So I think we have to talk about it and convince ourselves that we're just different, and that's okay. It's okay to have different color hair, eyes. Why is it that being different in other ways disturbs us so? I'm not quite sure.
Psychology is a science that is continuously evolving, constantly changing as research teaches more about human behavior. Psychologists recognize that we do not live in a vacuum. We are all part of a society and subject to the influences of that society. For the Mount Logan expedition, reaching camp at the 17,000-foot elevation provided a critical turning point. For the first time on the climb, there was doubt about the climbers actually reaching the summit. Social psychologists who study group dynamics would be interested in examining how a group like this would reach a decision, given the challenges of the situation.
Well, the decision was the fact that looking at the deterioration of my fellow climbers, the ones that I thought were weakening faster than they should have, both because of altitude and because of nutrition, and also the time commitment, having to get back and assume their responsibilities in everyday life. And we had already overextended ourselves to try to make the summit bid that we did.
When Carl initially made the decision to turn back, he was assuming the entire group would go back, and that's how he stated it. And there were apparently 4 of us that were thinking in our own minds that we were not ready to go back yet. We didn't feel we had given it our best at this point.
After Carl had gone around to the tents, I just walked amongst the area amongst the tents in kind of a depression and just in shock and not knowing what to do, how to react or accept this news that we were going down. And despite Carl telling me we were going down, I started discussing with Wanda and Joe if they would be interested in going on, not knowing whether Carl would permit it or not.
And I didn't think it was fair now that I had done everything I was supposed to climb this mountain. The weather's great. I look outside, the sky is blue, and we're going down. It just did not make sense to me. So I started to become really angry, and Joe and I talked about that.
I think that for any group that wishes to be cohesive, that is a tightly knit group, there is a level of obedience that's required of group members. Groups that are loose, not well defined, they don't require the degree of obedience that, say, a tightly knit group would. So that a tightly knit group needs its members to adhere to its rules, its norms. It needs its members to respect its leaders. It needs its members to carry out their designated tasks. So obedience would be a requirement for a group that is tight, cohesive, a group in which each of the members regard themselves and identify as group members.
With 4 climbers still committed to pushing on for the summit, Karl Garzinski agreed to divide the team in 2 and allow one group to summit and the other to turn back down the mountain.
The splitting of the team to people that wished to continue on to the summit and those that were retreating, I would say at that point the morale was probably one of the highest on the expedition because people were doing what they wanted to do.
We were all very glad that the 4 of us wanted to continue, and that way if only one of us wanted to go on, obviously we're not going to go on solo.
Just as the summit group of 4 influenced Karl to change his decision, group and social influence have a tremendous impact on our everyday behavior.
It's easy to think about the influence of the group in terms of large social groups that we belong to. But if you think of group influence as really social influence, one other person trying to urge you to do something, you see the same process in your intimate relationships. Boyfriend, girlfriend, family member, whether it's spouses or not. The other person wants you to do certain things, and they'll like you if you do those, and they'll dislike you if you don't. And so all of us experience social influence, or in a sense group influence, if it's a group of 2, even on our intimate relationships.
The 4 remaining climbers continued to ascend at a blistering pace in a final attempt to reach the summit. Unfortunately, due to numerous reasons, the group was faced with the ultimate decision of having to retreat off of Mount Logan, having never reached her peak.
We didn't have a lot of food. We were all tired from the day's exertion, not to mention the previous 2 weeks of just getting to that point. I said, I don't think it's a good idea to continue. I think we should just call it now before things get ugly.
Mike, what's your view?
I don't feel good about it for a variety of reasons. It's a thin layer of snow over a little harder packed stuff. I think a person who falls might have a difficult time self-arresting, maybe not. If you don't get your self-arrest, it's very likely you'll be seriously injured or die because there's no run out. It drops down off a little cliff band here, and then about the same steepness down to some crevasses down below. There might be softer snow down below, though, I'm not sure. That would slow you down, possibly stop you. But I think you'd have to take the attitude that if you don't get your self-arrest, you will die. I think you have to take that realistic attitude.
Mike pulled out his map, and because at this point we still could not see the summit of Mount Logan. We're in a whiteout now, and he pulled out the map and he said, here we are, and here's where we need to go. And I knew when I looked at that map that it was too far into the day for us to even attempt to try and make it to the summit.
The 4 of us didn't make the summit for many reasons. Weather, diminished cognitive skills due to the altitude, soft snow conditions, particularly for the first few hours on the summit day, causing us to sink further into the snow and expend more energy, visibility, fatigue, the distance we had to travel and still travel.
Even though we didn't summit, I had one of the best trips I've ever had, and it didn't include the summit. So I learned a lot about myself as a mountaineer because I helped in the decision to actually turn around, make the decision to go back, and that's not in my nature. I'm usually the last dog to die. But I was pretty pleased with myself that I was able to make that prudent decision and not feel bad about it.
I consider the Mount Logan expedition a success. Again, the process was good. The interaction with 10 people from all different walks of life was fun to be involved in, fun to observe. And it was a building process where everybody contributed to even giving us a chance to make an attempt at the summit.
Where do we find the motivation to persist in the face of obstacles and challenges? How does our health and the stress of our lives affect our behavior? And how is our behavior affected by our upbringing, our views on gender, and our response to group influence? These questions and many more certainly are not confined to the interaction of mountain climbers. However, they do lead us toward the pivotal question in psychology: why do we behave as we do?
Oftentimes I find myself in a position when some difficulties arise in everyday life of putting myself back into a position on a mountain someplace that's quiet and serene, and yes, I use that as my solitude.
Well, human behavior accounts for a lot of health outcomes. It accounts for social interaction. It accounts for a significant part of what makes us human.
We want to know better about ourselves. We want to know better how to deal in our relationships with others. I think a lot of interest in psychology has to do with how do we be better parents, how do we be better citizens.
And the reason I think we think behavior is so important to study is not just because we want to understand ourselves and others, not just because we know that behavior is the root of everything interpersonal, of what's wonderful about society, of what's problematic about society, not just because we want to solve some of those social problems, but because we also know that it's behavior that changes the brain, that changes biology, that changes neurochemistry. And this interplay between what's inside and what's outside, between what's biological and what's behavioral, this interplay is what the future of the field of psychology is going to be all about.